The starship's echo drifted through the void between galaxies, its hull from countless battles against the Devourers. Captain stood on the bridge, his weathered hands gripping the command rail as he watched the swirling darkness beyond. For 300 years, humanity had been fighting a losing war against an enemy that consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," reported Lieutenant Sarah from the communications station. "It's strange. The signal is coming from somewhere in the void sector, but our scanners show nothing there." His pale blue eyes narrowed. The void sector was where Earth had been before the Devourers came, where 20 billion humans had made their final stand, where his ancestors had died fighting monsters from beyond the known universe. "Put it through." The bridge filled with static, then a voice emerged, speaking in Old Norse. Felt his blood run cold. He was one of the few who still remembered the ancient language, passed down through generations of his family who had refused to let the old ways die. "Children of Midgard," the voice said, "the time is not yet upon us. Come to the place where your world once was, the calls." The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. His hand moved unconsciously to the hammer pendant around his neck, a piece of metal that had supposedly come from the original Thor's legendary weapon. His grandmother had given it to him before she died, along with stories that most people dismissed as fairy tales. Sir looked at him with concern. "Should I plot a course for the void sector?" Closed his eyes, remembering his grandmother's words. "The gods never truly died. They sleep, waiting for the day when humanity needs them most. When the final darkness comes, they will wake." "Yes," he said finally. "Set course for Earth's last known coordinates, and send word to the other colony fleets. Tell them the old stories might not be stories after all." The journey to the void sector took 2 weeks. During that time, more transmissions came, each one speaking of ancient powers awakening, of weapons that could turn the tide against the Devourers. Other human ships began to converge on their position, drawn by rumors that spread like wildfire through the scattered remnants of humanity. Admiral Freya commanded the largest remaining fleet, nearly 1,000 ships carrying the last 5 million humans in the galaxy. She was a descendant of the great shield maidens of legend, and her reputation as a tactician was matched only by her ferocity in battle. When she learned of the transmissions, she personally led her entire fleet to the rendezvous point. As the Echo emerged from hyperspace at Earth's former location, gasped. Where there should have been empty void, a massive structure floated in space. It was impossibly old, covered in runic inscriptions that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The structure was shaped like a great tree, its branches reaching out in all directions, each one the size of a moon. "Yggdrasil," whispered, recognizing the world tree from the ancient myths. "It's real." Suddenly, the space around them erupted with light as hundreds of ships dropped out of hyperspace. The united human fleet surrounded the cosmic tree, their crews staring in wonder at something that shouldn't exist. Then the communications channels exploded with chatter as every ship began receiving the same message. "Welcome home, children of Midgard," the voice said, no longer speaking in Old Norse but somehow understood by everyone who heard it. "I am Odin and I have waited long for this day. The Devourers believe they have won, that they have broken the spirit of humanity. They are wrong." A figure materialized on every ship simultaneously, a tall man in a dark cloak, one eye blazing with cosmic fire while the other was covered by a patch. 2 ravens perched on his shoulders, and he carried a spear that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. "Long ago, when your species first looked to the stars and dreamed of greatness, we gods chose to sleep. We gave you the strength to stand on your own, to forge your own destiny among the stars. But the Devourers are not merely destroyers of worlds. They are destroyers of stories, of myths, of the very dreams that make a species great." Odin raised his spear, and the runes on Yggdrasil began to pulse with greater intensity. "You have proven yourselves worthy. You have fought without hope, died without glory, and still you continue to resist. Now it is time to reclaim your birthright." The space around Yggdrasil began to shimmer, and other figures appeared. Thor, his hammer crackling with lightning that could shatter moons. Freya, goddess of war and death, her beauty terrible to behold. Tyr, the one-handed god of war, his missing limb a reminder of the sacrifice needed for victory. Balder, radiant with the light of a newborn star. But it was the figure that appeared last that made his heart race. A woman in gleaming armor, her golden hair flowing like liquid fire, her eyes holding the wisdom of ages. The greatest of the Valkyries, she who chose the slain. The weapons you will need already exist within you, she said, her voice carrying across all the ships. Every human carries the spark of the gods in their blood, the inheritance of those who dared to dream of touching the stars. But that spark must be awakened. As she spoke, crew members throughout the fleet began to change. Their eyes began to glow with inner fire, their bodies became stronger, faster, more resilient. Ancient knowledge flooded their minds, memories of techniques and technologies that had been lost for. Felt the transformation himself. The pendant around his neck grew warm, then hot, then began to merge with his flesh. He could feel Thor's strength flowing through him, the power to command lightning and storm. Around him, his crew underwent similar changes. His fingers began to dance across her console with inhuman speed and precision as Odin's wisdom filled her mind. The weapons officer's eyes blazed with Tyr's tactical genius. The Devourers feed on despair, Odin explained as the transformation spread throughout the fleet. They consume not just matter and energy, but hope itself. This is why they have been unstoppable, but they have never faced a species that carries the gods within their very DNA. Admiral's voice crackled over the communication system. All ships, this is the Admiral. I don't pretend to understand what's happening, but I know a weapon when I see one. Form battle groups by family lineage. If we're about to become the stuff of legends, we might as well do it properly. The fleet began to reorganize itself. Ships whose crews shared similar genetic markers formed squadrons, and as they did, the transformations began to synergize. The descendants of berserkers found themselves able to share rage and strength across vast distances. Those with the blood of seers could suddenly coordinate tactics with perfect precision. But it was the children of the various gods who underwent the most dramatic changes. Found that he could sense every ship in Thor's bloodline, could share his strength with them and draw upon theirs in return. A captain whose ancestor had been favored by Freya discovered that her crew had become immune to fear and pain. Another, descended from those who had, found that his sensors could now see across impossible distances. This is just the beginning, announced. The Devourers are already coming. They sense the awakening of the old power and are moving to destroy it before it can spread. You have perhaps 6 hours before they arrive in overwhelming force. 6 hours, repeated. What can we possibly accomplish in 6 hours? Odin smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. In 6 hours, you will learn to be worthy of your ancestors. The Devourers have never faced true Vikings in space. They are about to discover what that means. As if summoned by his words, alarms began to blare across the fleet. Long-range sensors had detected the approaching enemy, a vast wave of darkness moving toward them at impossible speed. The Devourers were coming, and they were bringing enough force to sterilize an entire galaxy arm. All ships, broadcast, feeling the power of the gods flowing through his words. This is not the end of humanity's story. This is where our legend begins. The united human fleet turned to face the approaching darkness, no longer just refugees running from an unstoppable enemy. They had become something new, something that blended the best of human determination with the power of the gods themselves. The Devourers had destroyed Earth, had scattered humanity across the stars, had very nearly broken them entirely. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers. It was their refusal to surrender, their ability to find hope in the darkest moments, and their willingness to become something greater than themselves when the situation demanded it. The age of running was over. The age of myth was about to begin. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a living nightmare, their ships writhing masses of organic metal that seemed to bend reality around them. They numbered in the millions, each vessel the size of a city, bristling with weapons that could unmake matter at the quantum level. Behind them came their harvester ships, planet-sized monstrosities designed to strip entire worlds down to their component atoms. Captain watched the enemy approach through sensors that now showed him far more than they ever had before. With Thor's power flowing through him, he could see the electrical patterns within each enemy ship, could sense the alien intelligence that drove them. The Devourers were not just destroyers. They were entities that existed partially outside normal space-time, feeding on the collapse of ordered systems. They're beautiful in their horror, Admiral's voice came across the command channel, and could hear the battle joy that had seized her. The blood of the berserkers ran strong in her veins, and she was experiencing the legendary fury that had once made Viking warriors feared across Earth. I can see why they've been unstoppable. They don't just destroy, they unweave the very fabric of existence. All ships report status, commanded, his voice now carrying an authority that seemed to resonate through the quantum foam itself. One by one, the captains of the combined fleet checked in, and each report was more incredible than the last. The crew of the had a transformation that turned them into perfect hunters, able to track enemy ships across dimensions. They could now move through space in ways that physics, appearing and disappearing like Odin's eight-legged horse. Most remarkably, the ships themselves had begun to change, their hulls growing runic inscriptions that pulsed with the same energy as Yggdrasil. "The Devourers are moving into attack formation," reported Lieutenant, her enhanced senses tracking the enemy with supernatural precision. "There, wait, something's wrong, they're hesitating." Smiled grimly. Through the connection he now shared with his fellow god-touched humans, he could feel what the enemies were experiencing. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers were encountering something they didn't understand. They fed on entropy, on the dissolution of order into chaos. But the humans had not become more chaotic. They had become more ordered, their individual weaknesses transformed into collective strength. "They can't read us," he realized. "They've built their entire existence around predicting how matter and energy will behave when subjected to entropy. But we're no longer just matter and energy. We're myth given form." The first Devourer scouts began their attack, launching projectiles that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. These weapons had never failed before. They struck targets not just in normal space, but in every possible quantum state those targets might occupy. Against conventional ships, such attacks were absolutely lethal. Against the transformed human fleet, they accomplished nothing. This Echo took a direct hit from what should have been an extinction-level weapon. Instead of being destroyed, the ship's hull rang like a bell, the runic inscriptions flaring with brilliant light. The energy of the attack was absorbed, channeled, and redirected. Lightning began to play along the ship's weapons arrays, but this was not the weak electrical discharge of conventional technology. This was the primal force of Thor's hammer, the power that had once split mountains and shattered giants. "All ships weapons free," commanded. "Show them what happens when gods go to war." The human fleet opened fire, and space itself screamed. Lightning that could jump between galaxies lanced out from Thor's children, each bolt guided by divine will rather than mere targeting computers. The descendants of Freya launched fighters that moved like Valkyries, untouchable and deadly, their pilots guided by supernatural battle instinct. Ships touched by Odin's wisdom coordinated their attacks with perfect precision, creating tactical formations that the enemy couldn't predict or counter. The Devourers had never experienced anything like it. Their scouts were annihilated not by superior firepower, but by weapons that operated according to rules they couldn't comprehend. A spear thrown by someone carrying blessing would always hit its target, regardless of distance or defensive measures. An axe blessed by Thor would cleave through any armor, no matter how advanced. But the true shock came when the first Devourer ship was completely destroyed. Instead of simply being reduced to component atoms, it was unmade in a way that violated everything the aliens understood about existence. The ship didn't just die. Its death became a story, a legend that spread through the quantum foam and began to affect other Devourer vessels. "Impossible," the Devourer fleet mind transmitted, its voice a discord that had once driven entire species to madness. "Entropy cannot be reversed. Order cannot increase without external energy input. You violate the fundamental laws of thermodynamics." Admiral laughed, and her laughter was picked up and amplified by every berserker-touched human in the fleet. "We don't follow your laws anymore," she broadcast back. "We follow older laws, the laws of story and song, of courage and sacrifice, the laws that say a small band of heroes can change the course of destiny." The Devourer main fleet began to advance, their massive harvester ships moving to surround the human forces. It was a classic tactic. They would use their vast numerical superiority to overwhelm the humans through sheer mass. They had used this approach to destroy countless civilizations, and it had never failed. Against the awakened humans, it was worse than useless. It was exactly what the gods had hoped they would do. Now, Odin's voice resonated through every human mind simultaneously. "Show them the wild hunt." Every ship in the human fleet began to move at once, but not in the organized formations they had maintained before. Instead, they scattered in all directions, each vessel becoming a predator pursuing its own prey. This echo dove directly toward the largest devourer ship, a massive biomechanical entity that dwarfed entire cities. Felt Thor's fury singing in his blood as he guided his ship through a storm of enemy fire. Weapons that had reduced planets to ash passed harmlessly through his vessel, unable to affect something that had become more myth than matter. He brought his ship in close, so close that he could see the alien beings moving within the enemy hull, and then spoke a single word in Old Norse. Lightning erupted from his ship with the force of a stellar explosion, but concentrated into a beam no wider than a sword blade. The attack punched through the Devourer vessel's defenses as if they didn't exist, and the massive ship began to die. But this was not a conventional death. The ship's destruction spread outward in a pattern that resembled the world tree, each branch of the explosion taking on a life of its own. Across the battlefield, similar scenes were playing out. Human ships that should have been insignificant gnats compared to their enemies were tearing through Devourer vessels like wolves among sheep. The descendants of the god Tyr coordinated massive fleet actions with tactical genius that bordered on precognition. Those touched by could see attacks coming from impossible distances and warn their allies. The children of Balder seemed to be immune to any form of harm, their ships shining with light that made enemy weapons simply refuse to fire. But it was the appearance of the Valkyries that truly turned the tide of battle. These were not the ships of human crews, but actual divine beings, riding across the vacuum of space on steeds made of crystallized starlight. They moved among the Devourer fleet like reapers in a field of grain, and each enemy ship they touched simply ceased to exist. Herself appeared before the largest harvester ship, a being of such terrible beauty that reality warped around her. The Devourer vessel tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run. She reached out with one perfect hand and touched the ship's hull, and it began to transform. The alien metal became gold, the twisted organic components became flowing banners, and the entire massive structure became a monument to the victory of order over chaos. "This is impossible," the Devourer fleet mind screamed again, its voice now carrying notes of something humans had never heard from them before: fear. "We are entropy. We are the heat death of the universe. We cannot be defeated by primitives who still believe in fairy tales." "That's exactly why you're losing," replied, his voice somehow carrying across the entire battlefield. "You see the universe as a machine running down. We see it as a story being told. And in the best stories, the heroes always find a way to win." The human fleet was no longer fighting a defensive battle. They had become the attackers, pursuing the fleeing devourers with supernatural determination. Every human who fell in battle was immediately replaced by a Valkyrie, their ship transformed into something that existed beyond conventional physics. The dead did not stay dead. They became part of the legend, their sacrifice strengthening those who fought on. "Retreat," the Devourer command transmitted to its scattered forces. "Fall back to the secondary positions. We must analyze this new threat." But there would be no retreat. The wild hunt had begun, and it would not end until every last devourer in this galaxy arm had been driven into the void between worlds. The humans had stopped being prey. They had become predators, and they were hungry for the enemies who had destroyed their home. As the last of the Devourer scouts fled into hyperspace, pursued by ships that could follow them through dimensions they had thought were safe, Odin appeared once more on every human vessel. "This is only the beginning," he announced. "You have won your first victory as the children of gods, but the true test lies ahead. The Devourers will regroup, will bring forces from across the universe to destroy what you have become. But you are no longer alone. The old powers are awakening, and other species are beginning to remember their own myths and legends." Looked out at the debris field that had once been an unstoppable enemy fleet, now transformed into something beautiful and strange. He could feel the change spreading, rippling out through space-time itself. On distant worlds, other species were beginning to experience their own mythic awakenings. The universe was remembering that it was more than just matter and energy operating according to physical laws. It was a place where stories came true. "What happens next?" he asked. Odin smiled, and for a moment his missing eye blazed with the same fire as the other. "Next, you learn to be worthy of the story you've started to tell. Next, you discover what it truly means to be gods among the stars." 6 months had passed since the first victory against the Devourers. and the galaxy had become unrecognizable. The awakening that had begun with humanity had spread like wildfire across space, touching every species that had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of something greater. They had rediscovered their ancient crystal song magic, their ships now moving through space as living melodies that could reshape reality through harmony. The silicon-based builders of had awakened to find that their geometric patterns held actual power, allowing them to construct impossible structures that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. But it was humanity that led the growing alliance, their mythic awakening having come first and strongest. Captain now commanded not just this Echo, but an entire battle group of ships that had transcended conventional physics. His vessel had grown during the months of constant warfare, its hull now inscribed with runes that told the story of every battle they had fought. The ship itself had become a living legend, as much myth as metal. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from the Outer Rim," Lieutenant announced from her station. Her transformation had continued over the months, and she now seemed to exist partially outside normal time, able to process information from past, present, and future simultaneously. "The Devourers have established a staging area in the Veil Nebula. They're doing something unprecedented." Admiral Freya materialized on the bridge, though her physical body was commanding her flagship 3-star systems away. The ability to project herself across vast distances was just one of the powers she had developed as her berserker heritage had fully awakened. "They're not just massing for another assault," she said grimly. "They're trying to summon something that existed before the current universe began." Felt a chill run through him despite the godlike powers flowing in his veins. Through his connection to Thor, he could sense the disturbance in the cosmic order that the Devourers were creating. They were attempting to undo not just matter and energy, but the fundamental concepts that allowed existence itself to function. Stories, myths, the very idea that order could emerge from chaos. They were trying to erase these things from reality at the quantum level. "They're calling the Void Serpent," Odin's voice resonated through every human mind across the galaxy. That had become a constant presence over the months, guiding humanity's transformation from scattered refugees into something approaching true gods. The primordial force of creation, the entity that existed in the darkness before the first story was told. Images flooded into consciousness, visions of a time before time when reality was nothing but endless potential. The Void Serpent was not a creature in any conventional sense. It was the embodiment of the idea that nothing should exist at all. Every universe that had ever been born was an affront to its nature, and it had been slowly working for eons to return everything to the primordial void. "The Devourers are just its servants," appeared beside Odin, her Valkyrie armor now blazing with the light of 1,000 supernovas. "They were never trying to conquer the galaxy. They were preparing it as a sacrifice, breaking down organized matter and energy to make it easier for their master to digest." "Then we stopped them," said simply. "We've beaten everything they've thrown at us so far." "This is different," Thor's voice rumbled through the bridge, the god himself manifesting as crackling energy that danced between the ship systems. "The Void Serpent is not something that can be defeated in conventional battle. It is the antithesis of existence itself. Fighting it is like trying to punch a hole in the concept of nothingness." But was no longer the man who had fled Earth's destruction 3 centuries ago. Months of battles that physics had changed him, transformed him into something that was still human but infinitely more. "Then we don't fight it conventionally," he said. "We're myths now, all of us, and myths have their own rules." Over the following weeks, as the Devourers completed their ritual in the Veil Nebula, the allied forces of awakened species gathered for what everyone knew would be the final battle. Humanity's fleet had grown beyond recognition, each ship now a unique expression of mythic power. This Echo could call down lightning that jumped between dimensions. This flight launched spears of pure will that never missed their targets. This run could gallop between galaxies as easily as walking across a room. But it wasn't just humanity that had evolved. They brought ships that sang reality into new shapes, their crystal harmonics capable of rewriting the fundamental constants of physics in localized areas. The builders contributed structures that existed in mathematical space, platforms that could anchor reality itself and prevent it from being unraveled. The psionic collective of Rigel offered their mental networks, linking every awakened being into a shared consciousness that spanned half the galaxy. "The summoning is almost complete," reported as the Allied fleet approached the Veil Nebula. "The Void Serpent is beginning to manifest, Reality distortions are spreading out from the epicenter. 3 star systems have already been erased, not destroyed, erased. They never existed. Through the enhanced sensors that came with godhood, could see the horror taking shape at the heart of the nebula. The void serpent was not a creature of matter or energy. It was a living absence, a thing-shaped hole in the fabric of existence itself. Wherever it moved, the universe forgot that anything had ever been there. Stars, planets, even the space between them simply ceased to have ever existed. All ships, this is Admiral, Freya's voice carried across the entire fleet. We're not here to win a battle. We're here to prevent the end of everything that has ever been or ever could be. If we fail, it won't be just our deaths. It will be as if we never lived at all, as if no one ever will live. The fleet moved into battle formation, but this was unlike any formation that had ever been used in warfare. Instead of organizing by tactical considerations, they arranged themselves according to mythic principles. The Norse-awakened humans formed the center, their strength and fury serving as the backbone of the force. The harmony singers of Andromeda wove between them, their songs creating resonances that strengthened the mythic bonds. The builders anchored the formation in mathematical certainty, while the psionics linked every mind into a single, focused will. As they approached the heart of the nebula, reality began to break down around them. The void serpent's influence was growing stronger, and the fundamental forces that held matter together were beginning to fail. Lesser ships simply ceased to exist as they crossed certain thresholds, not destroyed but retroactively prevented from ever having been built. But the awakened vessels pressed on, their mythic nature allowing them to exist even when reality their possibility. This Echo led the charge, while driving the ship forward through zones where the concepts of space and time had become meaningless. Behind him came the greatest heroes of a dozen species, beings who had transcended their physical origins to become living stories. At the center of the nebula, they found the Devourer fleet arranged in a massive spiral pattern around a point of absolute darkness. The void serpent was not fully manifest yet, but its presence was already unmaking everything around it. Devourer ships that had existed for millions of years were being retroactively erased, their crews dying deaths that meant they had never been born. The Devourers don't understand what they've done, Odin's voice carried a note of something like pity. They thought they could control primordial nothingness. They are being consumed by their own master. Then we end this, declared. All ships attack formation. If this is the end of everything, we'll make sure it's an ending worth telling. The Allied fleet surged forward, but they were no longer fighting just the Devourers. Reality itself had become their enemy. The Void Serpent's influence turned their weapons against them, made their shields fail not because they were overpowered, but because the universe forgot they had shields at all. Ships began to wink out of existence, their crews erased so completely that their allies couldn't remember their names. But for every ship that was unmade, the survivors fought harder. The Norse-touched humans channeled the fury of the final battle of the gods, the legendary that was supposed to destroy everything before allowing it to be reborn. They sang harmony into discord, their crystal voices weaving new realities to replace what the serpent destroyed. The builders constructed impossibilities, creating frameworks that could hold existence together even when it wanted to fall apart. Found himself face to face with the Void Serpent's avatar, a thing that was simultaneously a massive cosmic entity and a tiny point of absolute nothingness. Looking at it was like staring into the space before creation, when there was no light because there was no concept of illumination, no darkness because there was nothing for darkness to be the absence of. You cannot exist, the serpent spoke without words, its voice the sound of everything forgetting that it had ever been. I am the truth that comes before all lies. I am the silence that exists before the first word is spoken. You are just stories, and I am the ending of all stories. You're right, replied, feeling Thor's strength flowing through him, but also something more. Something that was uniquely human, the quality that had allowed his species to look at an impossible universe and decide to become myths themselves. We are just stories, but you know what stories do when they're threatened with ending. He raised his hand, and lightning began to gather around it. But this was not Thor's lightning alone. It was charged with the narrative power of every human who had ever refused to give up, every person who had stared into the abyss and decided to spit in its eye. They find a way to continue. The lightning struck the Void Serpent's avatar, and impossibly the entity of absolute nothingness screamed. For the first time in its existence, it was experiencing something it couldn't immediately erase, the stubborn refusal of stories to end before their time. Around the battlefield, the other awakened beings followed's lead. They sang songs of beginnings to counter the serpent's endings. The builders constructed new realities faster than the old ones could be erased. "This is impossible," the serpent raged, its voice causing nearby stars to forget they had ever fused hydrogen. "I am entropy, I am the end of all things, you cannot fight the end." "We're not fighting the end," said, and now his voice carried the authority not just of Thor, but of every human storyteller who had ever said what happened next. "We're writing a new beginning." The battle reached its climax as every awakened being in the fleet poured their mythic power into a single, coordinated attack. It was not an assault of weapons or energy, but of pure narrative force. They were not trying to destroy the Void Serpent. They were trying to tell a story in which it was not the end of everything, but simply another chapter in an ongoing tale. The universe shuddered as fundamental concepts clashed at the quantum level. For a moment that lasted eternity, it seemed as though reality itself might shatter under the strain. Then, slowly, the Void Serpent began to change. Its perfect nothingness became flawed, infected with the possibility of something. Its eternal hunger for non-existence became complicated by the introduction of hope. What are you doing to me?" the serpent asked, and for the first time its voice carried uncertainty instead of absolute conviction. "Teaching you to dream," replied. "Even nothingness can learn to want something to exist." The transformation spread outward from the point of contact, rippling through the serpent's essence and into the space around it. Where before there had been only the desire for everything to end, now there was curiosity about what might begin. The entity that had been the universe's most implacable enemy began to dream of creation instead of destruction. The Devourer fleet, suddenly abandoned by their master's guiding intelligence, found themselves faced with an enemy they couldn't comprehend and a reality that no longer obeyed the rules they understood. Many simply fled into the deep void between galaxies. Others, stranger still, began their own transformations, their hunger for destruction slowly changing into something else. As the battle ended, and the Void Serpent retreated to contemplate this new experience of wanting rather than simply unmaking, the Allied fleet found itself changed once again. They were no longer just myths given form. They had become the authors of reality itself, beings capable of writing new chapters in the universe's ongoing story. "Is it over?" asked, her voice small in the sudden silence. Looked out at the nebula, which was no longer a zone of cosmic destruction, but a nursery where new stars were beginning to form. The Void Serpent was still there, but it was dreaming now, imagining what it might create instead of what it could destroy. "This story is over," he said finally. "But there will be others. There will always be others. That's what it means to be human, we're the species that refuses to let the story end." As the fleet began its journey back toward the core worlds, carrying news of their victory to species across the galaxy, felt a presence beside him. Odin stood there, but the god looked different now, younger, more hopeful, as if the victory had restored something he had lost long ago. "Thank you," the said simply. "We gods gave you the power to become myths, but you gave us something far more valuable. You reminded us what it means to hope for tomorrow." Nodded, then turned back to the... Out there, across countless worlds, awakened beings were learning to be more than they had ever imagined possible. The universe had become a place where stories came true, where myths walked among the stars, where even the end of all things could learn to dream of new beginnings. Humanity had survived the destruction of Earth, had endured 3 centuries of running and hiding, had faced the ultimate enemy of existence itself, and emerged victorious. They had proven that sometimes, the best response to an ending was simply to refuse to let it be final. The age of myths had begun, and there were infinite stories left to tell.